Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Pachaki, Program Manager here at the NVFC. I'd like to welcome you to today's Safer Grant webinar. Just to let you know real quick, following the presentation, we'll have a short Q&A session. I'd like to get things started by introducing today's speaker, Mr. David Lewis. David Lewis is an active member of the Odenton Volunteer Fire Company in Maryland with over 45 years as a firefighter EMT, past chief officer and company president. David is also an adjunct instructor with the National Fire Academy, Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, and the University of Maryland. David is also a past president of the Anne Arundel County Volunteer Firefighters Association and of the Maryland State Firemen's Association. He's also active at the regional and national level as a director to both the Cumberland Valley Volunteer Firemen's Association and the National Volunteer Fire Council. Dave?
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everybody. Hopefully everybody's trying to stay warm. I know we thought we got through the polar vortex and everything would be fine, but it seems like Mother Nature is still trying to remind us it is winter. So yesterday was President's Day, and we had a beautiful full moon, and they actually call that around here, they call it that the snow moon, because quite often we get the heaviest snows right around President's Day, which they're calling for about 4 to 6 inches tomorrow. So we're just holding out, and hopefully the weather is there. So I certainly welcome everybody here. We're glad to have this presentation this afternoon on enhancing volunteer recruitment retention using safer grant funding. We're going to go through some of the requirements for the safer grant for fiscal year 2018, and that will also give us the time to talk about the application and what you can do to make your application successful. I want to start with a short video, just kind of an introduction to kind of liven some things up. So I'm going to play this video. It's probably about 2 minutes, and then I'll get right back to you.
Hey, Chief. Hey, I've been meaning to ask you something.
Yeah, what's that, Carol?
Did you hear that Congress has appropriated money for the staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grants?
Yeah, the SAFER program, right?
Yeah,
I've heard about it.
Did you apply for a grant?
Well, the SAFER grants were about hiring firefighters. It's the volunteer unit.
Right. The SAFER grant isn't just about hiring firefighters. Volunteer and combination departments can also apply for a grant to recruit and retain volunteer firefighters.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder what we could apply for.
Well, funny you should ask. I've been looking into it, and I may have a few answers. Do you have a few minutes?
Sure. Let's go get a cup of coffee and you can fill me in.
Right.
Okay.
You.
So perhaps the conversation in your station started something similar to that. One of your younger members come up and says, "Hey, Chief, I heard about this thing called the SAFER grant. Have we ever thought about applying for it?" Says, "Well, gee, again, a common misconception is that SAFER is only for hiring of paid firefighters, and that's not true. There's a significant portion of the grant that goes directly towards the recruitment retention of volunteers, and that's why we're here today. We're here to talk, such as the young lady there took the chief aside and said, let's go talk about it. We're going to talk about it here this afternoon. So, and just as a reminder, here's kind of where we are. The Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program really is 3 grant programs. The Assistance to Firefighter Grant, those applications closed late last year. Unfortunately, because of the government shutdown, they have not gone through peer panels. We're actually scheduled to be in Emmitsburg next week in order to be your peer panel. So any of you that may have applied for the AFG for equipment and apparatus and haven't heard anything and wonder what's going on, that the government shutdown slowed down that entire process. And we'll be up in Emmitsburg next week. And I would imagine that they're probably going to try to pump awards out probably within 30 days or so of the peer panels, because this is fiscal year 18 money, which technically has to be obligated under law by September 30th. So they're going to be pushing these awards out as quickly as possible. Kind of dropped to the bottom, the fire prevention and safety, that closed right before Christmas. December 21st, I believe, was the date. So if you applied for that, that kind of got held up in the same boat. And so that has not been through the peer panel process yet. And I don't think that we're going to do that next week. That probably will be done at the same time that the SAFER grant applications are reviewed. So, and the one course we're here today is talking about SAFER, Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, funded in fiscal year 18 at $350 million. Just to kind of make sure you understand where we are in the process and how the process works. It all starts with not necessarily somebody sitting down in Washington, D.C. trying to figure out what the fire service means, but the nation's fire service gets together. The 9 fire service organizations, which the National Volunteer Fire Council is one, participates in something called Criteria Development Panel. We review the grant programs, all 3 grant programs, what should be the priorities, what has been the success, what has been failures in the application process in previous year, and certainly kind of work through that in order to establish priorities for the coming year. From that, the FEMA program office then develops the guidance document, commonly known as the NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, and they get those approved. And once those are approved, the application period starts. Now, the application period then opens, and again, SAFER just opened on Friday, February 15th, and was open until March 22nd. So we're currently in the SAFER application period right now. Once that application period closes, the automatic scoring and pre-scoring goes, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The applications then go to something called peer panels, where again, those 9 fire organizations send representatives to a location. Like I said, we're going to Emmitsburg at the National Fire Academy next week for AFG to review the application, determine which ones are most worthy of award consideration, and make those recommendations. FEMA then goes through a technical review process to make sure that all the legal parts are there, and that any items that may have been questioned by the peer panels are answered, and then basically makes the decision: either applications are awarded or you get the turn down letters, which again we hope you don't have. So it's important that you kind of understand that grant cycle, and that's the process that you'll be going through. Understand what the purpose of the SAFER program is. SAFER program provides funding for fire departments and volunteer interest organizations, basically to increase the number of firefighters. Okay, and again, it is the F in SAFER is fire, and it really is kind of looking at increasing the number of firefighters to put there to meet industry minimum standards and attain 24-hour staffing, whether it's in the station on duty or whether it's on call, in order to basically protect your community. And those national standards, those industry standards, again, are NFPA 1710 and 1720. You'll hear me talk about those a little bit more later as well. So where are we at for 2018? Again, the funding level is $350 million. And as in previous year, it includes 2 program activities. Hiring of paid firefighters, full-time paid firefighters, provides up to 3 years funding, 36 months. And those costs are split. The grant pays 75%. The first year, the awardee pays 25%. Same way in the second year, and by the third year, the grant cuts back to 35%, and the awardee has to pay 65%. And then the following year, the awardee has to make determination whether to sustain the paying of those people or, unfortunately, can lay them off. But the one we're most interested in, the one we're here to talk about, is the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. Your grant application can be between 12 and 48 months. A lot of people immediately say, do I have to put in a 4-year grant program? And no, if you just want to try some things for 1 year or 2 years, then you can put in, just says, I only want funding for 12 months or 24 months. And the beauty of it is there are no matching fund requirements. And you actually, as a department, you can submit 2 applications. If you have hiring needs, you can put an application in for hiring. And then you have recruitment retention needs, you can put an application in for that. Each of those are scored separately, they're reviewed separately, and you may get funding for one or both of those if you die. And it's not one single application, it truly is 2 different applications. Some other things that we need to consider when we think about the recruitment retention part of it is 10% of that money, and I know it doesn't sound a lot when you're talking about $350 million and we only get $35 million of it, is set aside for recruitment retention. Unfortunately, that's restrictions in the law, but I think it's done a lot of departments very good, and I'll show you some numbers here in a minute. And no more than 1/3 of that money can go to national, state, or local organizations. So if your state organization or even the National Volunteer Fire Council put in, they're capped off at they can get no more than 1/3 of the money. The other 2/3 has to go directly to fire departments in order to assist them with recruitment and retention efforts. 10% of the funding for all the, even in the hiring activity, that 10% of that funding is set aside for all volunteer departments that are looking to augment their staffing requirements by hiring either the first time paid people, or if it's a majority of volunteer department, maybe adding to the paid people that they put in there. And it just turns out that if less than 10% of that funding goes to volunteer departments, then the remaining funds must be transferred over to recruitment retention. It doesn't make the pot bigger for the all paid departments. So this is just some restrictions that are written directly into the law. I just kind of went back and looked at the spreadsheet for fiscal year 2017. In fiscal year 17, there were 292 awards nationwide for hiring, or 73% of the total awards that were given out. There were 109 awards giving out for recruitment retentions, or 27. We actually got 27% of the awards that were giving out. But we got 10% of the funding. It actually was $37 million that we got. So we got a little bit more than what was out there available in fiscal year 17. So we got about 1/4 of the overall awards, and we get about 10% of the money for recruitment retention. So we're going to focus today only on that recruitment retention effort. That should be the part that's of interest to our volunteer departments across the United States. If you're going after hiring, again, read the NOFO and look at that. We're going to spend the time that we have here together talking about recruitment and retention and what that part of the program looks like. So again, the recruitment retention is to assist you with recruitment retention of volunteer firefighters, to be involved with and trained in the operations of firefighting and emergency response. The goal is to increase the number of trained and competent firefighters that you have to respond to emergencies, again, to help you meet the NFPA, which for us would be 1720. Okay, I have a question. I'm gonna pause here just for a minute to look at this question. Can you explain what is considered a volunteer or mostly volunteer department? Well, again, the NOFO is very clear that a volunteer department is a department that has at least one volunteer, and it could be the rest all career, or it could be, if it's mostly volunteer, then it's at least 51% of the staffing is volunteers. So it's those definitions are spelled out in the NOFO. So if you want further clarifications, Daniel, please feel free to look at the NOFO there. Who can apply for SAFER under recruitment retention? Could be a volunteer department, could be a combination department, could be national, local, state, tribal organizations that basically represent the interests of volunteer departments. Daniel also asked about paid per call. Paid per call is considered to be a volunteer as long as, and you'll see this very on if you look at the frequently asked questions, and it actually show up at the end of the briefing here today. If the nominal stipend that paid per call firefighter gets is no more than 20% of what a full-time firefighter gets, then again they are considered to be a volunteer department. If they're receiving more than what a 20% of a full-time firefighter gets, then for purposes of the grant they're considered to be a paid firefighter. So let's look at that. We're going to talk about priorities. We're going to talk about priorities quite a bit here. The highest priority is to assist the departments that may be experiencing a high rate of turnover. It's no secret that volunteer departments across the United States are having a lot of trouble recruiting and retaining volunteers. Our volunteers that we have are getting older. The younger people aren't necessarily coming on there, and therefore, you know, you have basically response levels that are less than what is optimal to initiate a fire attack. 1710 is basically based for career departments that have large staffing profiles that could put 15 to 18 people on the scene within a short order of time. 1720 is meant more for the volunteer departments, where many of us come from, that basically says within a reasonable time, and it doesn't give a time factor, because some of you may have response areas where you're traveling 30, 40, 50, or even more miles to get to a response. But it says you ought to be able to at least assemble 4 people there in order to initiate fire attack. Why 4? The old principle of 2 in and 2 out, right? So again, you know, are you able to consistently put 4 people on the scene of a structure fire in order to initiate that while you're waiting for additional help to come, either call back from your own department or mutual aid coming in, so it's going to look at, you know, your organization, and do you have a low recruit retention rate? Then you need the help, you need the money, and that's where the highest priorities are going to go. And you're going to see some more specific priorities as I kind of walk through what's delineated in the NOFO. Just kind of want to gauge us to start off is that it really is about having a recruitment retention program. It's not say, hey, you know, I hear the federal government's got $350 million. Why don't we go after a piece of that? You know, throw money at it and hope it solves the problem. So, you know, the three key factors in order to be successful at this is, number one, you have to have a plan. What do we need to do in order to increase staffing in our community with our fire department? Is it, you know, again, is it to bring on more volunteers? Is it to provide incentive programs that has them respond? Is it to provide them, you know, the capability to respond by being better trained? Is it to go on a pay per call type of system? Is it to actually hire, you know, some full-time people to augment, and we form a combination department as opposed that we've gone, you know, for 50, 60 years or more as a totally volunteer system. We know that we can't sustain a capability with that, and maybe it's time that we hire 1 or 2 paid people in order to do that. So have a plan. You have to think this out and have a plan. And then second of all, it's very important that you assign somebody to coordinate and manage the program. When you look at the success of the programs that have been out there, they have somebody assigned to do that. Now that can be, you know, one of your volunteer members, or you can actually have funding under the Safer Grant program to hire somebody specifically to coordinate your program, manage the reports that need to be done with FEMA, put your programs together, do your marketing and things like that. So again, it's very important to make sure that somebody's identified that's going to coordinate and manage your program. And thirdly, you got to have measurable results. You know, what is the staffing profile that you have now relevant to 1720? What would you like to achieve? You know, in my own department, we staff our station 24 hours a day. We're a volunteer department, but we run about 6,000 calls a year. We're a very busy volunteer department. So we staff the station 24 hours a day. We're augmented with career staff during the day, but at nighttime, it's volunteer except for a paid driver. So I look, in order to staff a fire engine with 4 people and an EMS unit with 2 people and a ladder truck with 4 people, I need 10 people there every night. So therefore, I have to think about, you know, 10 nights times 7, that's 70 people. I had to have a considerable amount of volunteers to do that. And when I built our SAFER program for my department, we basically used those kind of measurable results. You know, how many people am I getting there on an average night now? Am I only being able to put the fire engine or the ladder truck on the street, but not both at the same time? So we need to look at those kind of things and have a measurable results. So think about that. And since I talk to firefighters when I do this, I kind of bring the analogy of the fireground size up. You know, you pull up on a house fire, such as the one depicted there. You say, okay, what do I need? That's kind of that needs assessment. You know, how many people do I need, and where do I get them? That's your recruitment problem. And what do I do when they get here? That's the retention problem, because it's not enough just to bring new members in, but you got to figure out what do you do when you get them there? And how do you get them trained? How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them interested? What do they expect from you? And what are you doing in order to meet their expectations as well as your expectation? So kind of use that size up kind of thing. You know, needs assessment is very important. That's part of that planning process. And then what do we need to do for recruitment? What do we need to do for retention? Make sure that you look at the documents that are online. www.fema.gov/firegrants is your one-stop shop. Look at the notice of funding opportunity, NOFO. That's your Bible. That tells you all about the program. Everything that I'm telling you today is documented in there. What is eligible, what is not eligible, how to apply, how it's evaluated, how to manage your grant afterwards. And then there's a couple other quick sheets that you might want to look at. One is an application checklist. It's very good to help you as you get started, kind of collect all the data that you need, your run statistics, your staffing statistics, all those things like that. Get those things on there so that when you sit down in front of the computer to do your application, you've got that data ready for you. You've kind of worked through that there. And then there's a self-evaluation checklist. Kind of how would this look to somebody on the outside? Because this self-evaluation checklist is the same criteria that the peer panelists are going to look at when they review your application. So it's important that you look at that. And then there are some frequently asked questions, just like the ones that we popped up there a few minutes ago. It's important that we kind of look at those frequently asked questions, because if you have a question, it's possible that somebody else has had it before. So it's important that you kind of look through that. As many of you have dealt with the grant programs before, you need to make sure that you have some data based there, your federal EIN number. You do have to be registered with DUNS, and you do have to be registered for SAM, System for Awards Management. Those kind of get a little bit cumbersome, but those are not that difficult. And you don't need, and ignore all the emails out there that say, hey, you hire us, we'll do your SAM registration and save you all that grief. You can do it yourself. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult. Just follow the instructions and follow the process. So here's the evaluation process. You need to think about, there's two parts to how your application, and I'll talk about the contents of the application here shortly, but I think it's important we talk about what happens to it once it's submitted. There's two parts to it. One is an electronic pre-score, and that's 30% of your total score. And that's how you respond to those standardized questions. And I'll kind of walk through those a little bit here in a minute. The most important part is the stuff you put in the narratives. And those are read by a panel of your peers. There will be, at least 3 people that review your application that don't know you. I come from Maryland, as said in my introduction. I would never read an application from the state of Maryland because I know almost every department and the individuals involved in Maryland. It would be a conflict of interest. So it's important that your narrative, because I don't know you, tells me kind of who you are, what your problems are, and what your solutions are to solve those problems. And there's actually 4 parts to that narrative. One is the project descriptions. What are you going to do with the SAFER money? Second part is impact on daily operations. How is it going to help you achieve the staffing profiles that you need? The third part, why do you need federal money? Financial need. What's your budget look like? What accessibility do you have to some of your budget money in order to do some of these things? And why can't you reallocate to do that? If people are your biggest problem, why are you buying fire hose instead of paying to have people in there? So again, you just kind of got to go through that with the financial need. We'll walk through every one of these things. And then the cost benefit. Why is this the most cost-effective solution? What is the savings that's going to be achieved by bringing on more volunteer firefighters as opposed to having to pay people to do that? How does this help you, reduce property loss in your there? And so that counts for 70% of the score. And so that's actually pretty good. This is now the second year that we were able to get the narrative part, which really is the meat and potatoes of your application, at 70-30, whereas before it used to be 50-50. And it would basically produce some unfavorable results because the pre-scoring sometimes didn't give you an adequate chance to explain your problem and your solution. So the 70-30 now, is working good, and we fought hard at NVFC to get that scoring change to that. As I said, the pre-scoring, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but it's going to look at how you fill out the application, and it's going to look at things like the population served, the call volume, because those are increasing the need, right? The more people you serve, the more calls you're running, is a greater need to have people. And then what is your ability to meet those staffing levels based on, again, NFPA 1720 more likely. And what is your plan to increase member participation in order to meet those staffing levels? And then finally, it's going to pre-score on what are the priorities of the activities that you selected. And I'll kind of walk through these priorities here in the next few slides. And you need to take a little bit different look, when those of you that have participated in the AFG, the Assistance to Firefighter Grant, we pretty much tell you that you need to apply for the high priority things and don't apply for anything that's medium or low because it won't get funded. But it's a little bit different in SAFER. SAFER, they're all funding eligible, and there really is no discriminator that says if you're asking for low priority stuff, you're not going to get funded. But obviously, you need to have some high priority stuff in your application, because those are the things that through research and experience have proven that makes the grant program most successful. And so therefore, that ought to have some of those high priority things. But you can also ask for the mediums and the lows. It doesn't discriminate. If you kind of look at that, is that if you get 10 points if it's a high, and 8 points if it's a medium, and 6 points if it's a low, and kind of look at that as it went through the that in a few years. And so here's the things that are up on a high priority. First of all, what have you done? Remember I talked about the needs assessment. It's kind of that size up on the fire ground. What do I got? What do I need? Where can I get it from? And you actually, if you don't think you have a good handle on that, you actually can go out and ask for a 1-year funding for a staffing needs assessment, and you can hire somebody to actually go out and do a formal assessment for you. And again, as it says there, if you decide that that's what you're going to do, that's the only thing they will let you do, because you ought to be able to go out and do that needs assessment and then be able to come back the next year with a grant application that basically says, based on that needs assessment, here's our program that we've identified. So that's one item. Remember, I said that it's very important that somebody be assigned to do your recruitment retention as a coordinator, a program manager, or a grant administrator. You can fund anyone, or again, a lot of the larger ones, like for the state grants that are looking at statewide, they actually have maybe all 3 of those positions. They have somebody to do as the coordinator, somebody to manage specific program parts of it, and somebody to manage all the financial aspects and the paperwork that's necessary. And so if you do ask for funding for that, or you're going to do it in-house, and in my own case, the one we did it, we have an active membership committee and a membership chairman that we assigned to do that. And so we did it with volunteer support, and we didn't need to actually hire somebody. But we did identify in a grant that here is the program, here is the person that is going to do that. So that, again, we do get the check mark that says we have somebody that's going to manage this and coordinate this grant for us. The third part that's a high priority is a marketing program. What are you going to do for marketing? Are you going to do some things with media, whether it be TV, radio, print advertising, it says? And yes, you can ask for an electronic sign in front of your station. If you want that to be determined to be a high priority, then you have to attest that 75% of the time, the message on that electronic sign is going to be volunteers needed or something like that. If you plan to also use it for fundraising activities and things like that, those fundraising activities can be no more than 25%. If you do, and you'll see that it pop up here in a few minutes, if it's used more 50% for fundraising and 50% for recruitment, it just lowers the priority, but it is an eligible item. And you see the bottom line there. You have to have some type of marketing plan. How are you going to market? how are you going to have that community outreach to let the community know that you need volunteers, and here's what you want them to do, and here's how they can help their community by joining the department. I'm going to pause right here. I got a little question here from Nicholas. Says, our department's dire need of members in a new municipal building. Is there any issue if we apply for the SAFER grant and a rural development grant in the same year or subsequent years? I assume you're talking about the rural development grant would be for the building. And again, those really are separate activities, and there's nothing to say that you can't apply for that. In the same way, there's nothing to say that you can't apply for AFG and FP&S and SAFER, all three of the FEMA grant programs. Often when I do these workshops, I talk about, I kind of put people in, again, put them in a fire mode in order to have, let's talk about the fire triangle. In order to have fire, you got to heat, fuel, and oxygen. You got to have all three those pieces in order to sustain fire. Well, I talk about the grant triangle, let's just say, the mission triangle. In order to sustain the mission of your department, you had to have equipment and apparatus, and that's AFG. You had to have people, that's SAFER, and you had to have a community risk reduction program, and that's FP&S. So you really need all three of those pieces in order to sustain the mission of your department. And there are 3 grant opportunities that you can apply for in order to do that. So Nicholas, now there's no reason why you can't apply for multiple grant opportunities in order to meet the requirements for your department. Other things that are also high priority: new member physicals. You know, we all know that firefighting is a risky business, and it's physically demanding, it's mentally demanding, and so therefore a lot of departments say, you know, well, we really can't provide the money to provide those physicals to our new members. Again, under SAFER you can. AFG also has money for physicals under the health and wellness program. But again, you know, new member physicals are a high priority, with the caveat it must meet NFPA 1582. It's kind of an expensive physical, but it's encompassing, and it really is meant to look at the risk, the physical and mental risk of firefighting. Your typical DOT physical, your typical doc in a box physical, or even the annual physical that you get from your personal physician as a part of your insurance program is not as encompassing as NFPA 1582. New member training costs. Is it going to cost you anything to train these new members? You know, in some states training is provided free, and other states the members have to pay for the training, or maybe they get the training, but they had to go somewhere else to take a certification exam in order to qualify their training. So again, those can be paid. It's also important that we develop our leaders, and so leadership training, career development training can be paid for as a retention incentive, and that's a high priority. To provide the capability to do your own training in-house, to send some of your members for instructor training or train the trainer training is available. Tuition assistance for higher education. You know, sometimes, you know, you have members that are working on a college degree, and college is not cheap, and maybe they have to make a decision whether they have time to volunteer or whether they got to go work a part-time job or a second job in order to pay for their education. In my own department, we've been able to provide tuition assistance to some of our members through our SAFER grant program, just so that they didn't have to go out and work a second or third job in order to pay for their school. We would help them pay for school. In exchange, they come help us meet our staffing requirements for our station. PPE is a high. You get a new firefighter, you bring them in, recruit them. They pass their 1582 physical and certified as fit for duty. In other words, they pass their physical. You can buy turnout gear, their PPE, with the SAFER grant. Somebody had a question earlier about pay on call. You can pay nominal stipends. And, you know, maybe you're at a point where, you know, the only way you can get people to come into the station is that you pay them $10, $15, $20, $5, whatever it might be, you know, based on their activity on a pay per call type point system. And again, you can provide them those nominal stipends as long as they are participating in operational activities such as duty shifts, training, or responding to calls. Somebody had a question about EMS recruitment, retention and training to become EMTs or paramedics. The F in SAFER is fire, and it really is geared to fire. And so the primary responsibilities of that individual that we're talking about they need to have firefighting responsibility. You cannot go out and explicitly recruit EMTs or paramedics under SAFER. You need to recruit firefighters. They may also be EMTs or paramedics, but they have to have as their primary responsibilities is that they are a firefighter. Continuing down, we're in the medium priorities now, by the way. The stipends are a medium priority. Costs for explorer, junior firefighter, cadet programs, mentoring programs are all medium priority. A lot of jurisdictions throughout the country have what we call a LOSAP program, length of service award program, that says that you give us 10 years, 20 years, whatever the number of years active service is, then we will give you a benefit payment of 100, 200, 500, whatever the number happens to be per month for the rest of your life. It's kind of like a retirement program, but we don't call it a retirement program. It really is a benefit program. If you don't have that and you want to have that as part of your incentive package, you can initiate that. If you already have a program in place, you cannot fund it with SAFER. But if it is a new program, you can. What about insurance packages? A lot of times we have concern with our volunteer fire departments is that I can't volunteer because I may get hurt and I'd lose my job. So maybe we provide some type of health insurance, some type of life insurance, some type of workers' compensation insurance. Again, you can pay for that out of the SAFER grant. Look at, again, under the medium priority, they actually can provide some funding to put exercise equipment, gym memberships, no more than $10,000 per grant award in there. We recognize, again, it is physically demanding, and maybe having exercise equipment in the station has them in there available to run calls as opposed to going to a gym somewhere. So we look at that. David had a question about EMT tuition, firefighter training media be purchased. Said he couldn't find it in the NOFO. I'd have to look at it exactly, but I think that those materials could be provided. There's a specific area under AFG that talks about training, and this really is more SAFER is more about getting the people in there. We certainly can have training for your new members, and that was in a previous bullet that we talked about. But it's not there. The intention of it is not to be a training grant, but it is a staffing grant. Again, the F in SAFER, I guess I would say. Move down to low priority, and again, just because it's a low priority doesn't mean it won't be funded. But again, when they start looking at point criteria and scoring in the application, high, medium, and low is going to have different point values for it. So again, you bring a new member in, you can provide them a set of station uniforms. You can provide costs for advanced training. Maybe there's some training that may not be directly available to you through your state training academy or other resources, but it's relative to your mission. Rescue capability, extrication, swiftwater rescue, special equipment training, farm rescue, large farm animal rescue, things like that. You can actually, again, you can do some of that training out of there. Computer, if we have a computer for the coordinator, that can be purchased with the grant. Again, it's a lower priority. Awards incentive program for participation, such as plaques, gift cards, non-uniform clothing. Those are all eligible. We do a lot in my department with the If they complete training courses, we provide them a gift card. We provide gift cards for our top responders at the end of the year when we do our annual awards banquet. We provide plaques to the members that again achieve the top 10 level. And periodically, we've done some non-uniform planning, such as job shirts, sweatshirts, and things like that to members who meet certain training levels. And again, remember remember I talked about the LED sign having to be used 75% of the time for recruitment retention. If you're not doing it, if you're not going to use it 75% of the time, you still can do it. But again, it becomes a low priority at that point. EMS recruitment, there was a questionnaire, retention and training to become EMTs or paramedics eligible to funding. Again, the goal of the program is to recruit and retain firefighters. It's not to say that EMS is not secondary to their job, their membership, but certainly it can't be their primary role. We always get that question, but this is not an EMS recruitment program. This is a firefighter recruitment program. Here's some more activities of low priority. Fire Service Association membership fees. I use this in my own SAFER grant to sign every one of my members up as a National Volunteer Fire Council NVFC member. It gives them access to a $10,000 AD&D policy being a member. It gives them access to the virtual training network that NVFC offers for a lot of online classes that they had. Allows them to apply for things such as the training summit that we do once a year. That provides a travel thing. I think $600 is for the one we're doing this June in Portland, Oregon. And you have to be an NVFC member to apply for that so basically a scholarship support. So I use that under my SAFER program, the Fire Service Association membership fees. I also take my officers and make them members of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, my instructors, the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. Yeah, David, we're coming to Portland. You can also get a projector and screen to support classroom training. You can also do payments for housing or rent at or near the station. I've actually seen applications where people, fire department was renting a house nearby because again, they had, maybe they didn't have sleeping quarters in the station. Okay, so they rented the house next door so that they did have sleeping quarters there. Or maybe they did have sleeping quarters in the station, but maybe they wanted to put people closer. There are a lot of departments across the United States that try to recruit. If they have a college nearby, they bring the college students in. So maybe they rent the house next door and turn it into a frat house, maybe. But I hope it's not that. But it's really, they have a ready group of people that are ready to respond to calls if they get there. So again, those can be done. And what if you're going to take an area of your station and remodel it in order to take a storage room and turn it into a study room, or you're going to take a storage room and turn it into a bunk station so that you can have people in there 24 hours a day. You can do some minor station modifications up to $10,000. Now here's some other things that are eligible, but they aren't a priority. So remember, if I said if it was 10 points, 8 points, 6 points, maybe these things are 4 points or something like that. If you have some administrative costs, general administrative costs, such as having somebody do the record keeping or whatnot, up to 3% of your award can be used for that. If you do pay a grant writer, and I often tell people you do not need a grant writer for any of these grant programs. The criteria is pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of departments throughout the United States paying people to do that. You can be reimbursed up to $1,500 if you have somebody doing your grant. Stipulation, again, you got to make sure that you have to pay that prior to the grant being awarded, because they're going to ask to see the copy of the check, and they're going to ask to see a copy of the bank statement to say that was. Because there are a lot of crooked people out there that says, hey, I'll write your grant for you. If you get it, you pay me $1,500. If you don't get it, I'm just a good guy. And there were some people that basically, and that kind of comes down to the second one. You kind of need to make sure that they have not been barred from receiving grant funds, because there are some grant writers out there that have done some scrupulous things and basically have gone on. You can look them up in SAM, and you need to find that they are not barred from receiving grant funds, because if they're a grant writer, they should be registered in SAM as well. There's also a stipulation: the grant writer can't be the person to manage the grant, unless, and again, you'd have to get some legal advice on that. That there was a contract that you contracted them for pre-award and post-award services. Because again, there was some people out there that were not so honest, that were going out there and says, hey, I'll write your grant, I'll write it for free, or I'll write it for $1, but if you get it, you're going to pay me $50,000 a year to manage it for you, or whatever the number happens to be. So again, be careful with the grant writers. There's been some shaky things going on there. If you have a large award, more than $750,000, you have to do what's called a single audit. It used to be an A133, but again, maybe again, if your own accounting principles require you to do audits, if you can do those auditing and accounting fees, actually can be put in as part of your grant budget request. Here's some things that you can't do. So these are the ineligible program items. You can't pay salaries and benefits. That's not volunteered. You can't pay for things that you already paid for prior to getting an award. You can't do things outside the period of performance. So again, if your grant award starts from October 1st and ends on September 30th, 4 years from now, you can't pay bills on October the 3rd of the year after that expires, because it's outside the period of performance. Or even things that again, as the bullet before it says, that you paid for before the thing says. You can't buy equipment, you can't buy vehicles, you can't buy training props, you can't buy sirens and warning lights for private vehicles. You can't buy cell phones, pagers, portable radios, CAD systems with these things. Those are things that you go for under AFG. Those are not things that you can go for under SAFER. You also can't buy video cameras and recording equipment. You can't, again, retroactive payments you can't do. You can't say, hey, we're gonna send as an incentive, we're gonna take everybody to the theater, we're gonna take them to a concert, we're gonna take them to a ball game and pay for those tickets. You can't do that under SAFER. You can't pay for your award banquet, such as food, refreshments, photographers, entertainment, renting the facilities, but you can pay for the awards themselves. The plaques, the trophies, the gift cards can be there, but the expenses that go with the banquet you cannot pay for under SAFER. You cannot pay for food and refreshments. You can't say, hey, I'm going to get people in here because we're going to have pizza every Friday. No, that's not, again, but if you're putting on a conference or you're putting on training, then maybe you put some money in there as part of that conference or training cost to maybe provide lunch, for that day. If you've already got money in your budget to pay for training, you can't supplant. You can't basically replace money you've already budgeted. You can't do things at a personal residence. You can't pay for them to have internet service. You can't pay to have their driveway plowed so that they can get to the fire station, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't pay for furniture, except for, remember that $10,000 conversion of a room into a bunk room. You can't pay for that. You can't pay for TVs, appliances, entertainment equipment. You can't say that that's an incentive for them to come in the station because we got a big screen TV. That's not going to get funded. You can't, and again, this list of eligible and ineligible is spelled out in the NOFO. You can't pay for giveaways. You say, well, gee, that's part of recruitment. Well, they're just not going to buy trinkets. So the pencils, the pens, the T-shirts, the Cubs and the mugs, the balloons, you're not going to be able to buy with SAFER funding. If you've got training out there that's free for charge, maybe it's free training that your state training academy provides, or it's training for go to National Fire Academy or things like that. You can't pay for that training if you're able to get it somewhere for free. Now, again, if you do send people to National Fire Academy, you can pay for their travel if they aren't on a FEMA stipend to go. You can pay for the meal ticket and things like that with SAFER. You can't pay directly for costs for fuel. You can't pay for existing member physicals. You can only pay for the new member, their initial physicals. You can't pay for student loans. You can offer people scholarships to go to school, but you can't pay off their loan. And we can't pay to have the station internet access. So, and yeah, there's more on the do not list. If you've already, I mentioned this earlier, if you've already got a LOSAP length of service award program in place, we can't fund that. We won't pay for computers in common areas. We won't pay for copiers and printers. We won't pay for PPE beyond the basic needs. In other words, a set of PPE is defined in the NOFO, helmet, boots, coat, 2 hoods, 2 pairs of gloves, that's the basic need for a firefighter. And if you've got an Explorer Cadet, a junior firefighter program, there are some parts of PPE we cannot pay for because they should not be in an IDLH environment as a junior member, cadet member. So let's kind of wind through this a little bit. Again, we talked about, I wanted to get through all the eligibles and ineligibles. Let's talk about the application process itself. Remember, I said that 30% of your score is going to be on the electronic scoring, 70% on the narrative. So let's kind of walk through those things. Remember, the electronic scoring is going to ask you certain questions about what is your capability to meet NFPA staffing requirements based on 1710, 1720. And again, for the majority of us, and probably every one of us on this call, it's probably 1720 because we are talking about recruitment retention. We're talking about volunteer departments. And what about your volunteer membership? How many members did you have, last year? How many do you have this year? How many did you lose? And is your department, 100% volunteer, therefore you get a higher score, or are you 5% volunteer, and therefore your electronic score is going to come out lower because you got a smaller percentage of the workforce that's going to be benefited. Call volume is a factor. It's not totally excluding. If you're with a department that only runs 25 calls a year, you still need firefighters. You still need people to put the wet stuff on the red stuff. But obviously we look at different departments in different ways. And what are you doing in order to keep your firefighters healthy? Do you currently provide entry-level physicals? Do you currently provide annual physical exams? You obviously will score higher. If you're not doing it, then what is your plan to do that in order to address health concerns for your firefighters? And again, there is funding for the new members to get their entry-level physical with the grant. What about your training and certification? How many of your firefighters are trained to the Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 level and EMT? Okay. And there were some questions about EMT. And again, as long as you're training your people to firefighters, we can help them out with EMT training as well. But again, their firefighter program, their firefighting mission needs to be primary. And again, a lot of people get hung up on this, and I talk about this when I do the Assistant Firefighter Grant Program workshops. But a lot of people get hung up on this trained to versus certified as. If you take your favorite vendor, ISTA, Jones & Bartlett, or whoever it is, take their manual and you train your firefighters to the Firefighter 1001 standard, they are trained too. Doesn't mean that you have to take them out and take them to the state academy and get them certified as, but how many of your firefighters are trained to those standards? The other part of the electronic scoring is, do you have a recruitment retention coordinator in place? And again, those who have one in place are going to score higher. Those who are requesting funding are going to score higher. But it's a low priority for those that do not have one in place or are not asking for funding. And again, there's regional requests. I have regional grants in the AFG program. There are regional grants in the SAFER program as well. And so if you have multiple departments that are going to get together and say that we all have the same problems. And what we're going to do is that we're going to consolidate our recruitment and retention efforts into a single program. Then again, you know, those applications will score higher. Somebody says, can funds be used to hire a fire chief full-time or part-time to ensure membership recruitment and retention? And again, you know, if you are hiring somebody to be the recruitment and retention coordinator and you just happen to also give them the title of fire chief, that's between you and the walls, okay? You know, you kind of think about, you know, you know, are they the recruitment and retention coordinator? You know, or do they have primary responsibilities for managing this safer program? And hey, every once in a while they run a fire call, and maybe they're also your volunteer fire chief in addition to that. And you see that quite often, you know. But again, their primary job responsibilities have to be, you know, there has to be, you know, contractual arrangement that they are responsible for managing the grant program. We're running short on time, so I want to kind of continue to move through there because this is all very important, because we're now getting to the narrative. The narrative is 70% of your score. There are 4 parts to the narrative: the project description, what it is you're going to do; the impact on daily operations, how it's going to help you meet staffing levels; the financial need, why you need federal assistance; and cost benefit, how it's going to this is the most cost-effective solution. So let me kind of think about that. You know, project description, 30% of that overall, your 30% based on a 100, and don't get that confused with the 70. But when you talk about what are the problems that you currently experiencing with recruitment retention? You've lost a number of members. You know, 50% of your membership is over 50 years old, whatever it is. You know. Then how are you going to satisfy that? What is your implementation plan? What goals have you established? What is your marketing plan? How are you going to market that to your community in order to bring that? How will you evaluate the program to see if that you're successful? What are the services provided by the member for the Department of Community? Fire suppression, fire education, life safety, fire prevention, you know, things like that. And is there regional impact? You know, will your grant program help other departments, either because you're now able to sustain enough staffing for mutual aid, or are the programs that you're putting together be offered to departments around you and allow them to come in and participate in your training activities or other things? Impact on daily operations. What is the risk that you currently got, and how are you going to reduce it? What is your compliance level with 1720? And how will you increase your numbers? Financial need. What is the current operating budget? What is your income? Kind of list that out. What is your expenditures? Kind of show then where is your budget shortfalls. What are other actions that you've taken? Have you tried to get an increase in funding? Have you done some other things to try to increase fundraising efforts? A lot of things that to be considered there. And then again, cost benefit. Benefit to your department, benefit to your community. Kind of think about quantifying your anticipated results. You know, if I spend $100,000, you know, and I'm able to save property, and you know, I'm protecting 10,000 people, then you know, that's $10 per household I'm able to help protect their property. Here's some common mistakes: not reading that NOFO document. That's your rule book. That's your guidance. Waiting till the last minute. I said March 22nd, that application period will close. I can tell you when I read applications, when we go up to peer panels, which ones were done in the last 3 days, because they're missing information, they're incomplete sentences, or instead of being a paragraph, they're 2 sentences. Their financial need says, we don't have any money and federal government does, so we want the federal money. I mean, that's kind of what it says, you know. Don't have a plan. Maybe the plan's too complicated. You know, I got a small fire department, you know, in middle America that's running 25 calls a year, and they're asking for $300,000 to do recruitment retention, and they want to do all these grand and gross things. I don't think that they, you know, it doesn't read to me that they have an adequate plan, that they haven't thought this through. Don't have nobody to manage it. Too many activities. Think about the things that you have that will help you with recruitment and retention. I had 9 program activities in our 4-year program, and sometimes we struggled to keep all 9 of those balls juggled in the air at the same time, but we did. So maybe what are the 4, 5, 6 things that you could do in order to enhance recruitment and retention in your department, and kind of think about those. And what does your membership need? Before I ever did our Safer application, I went out and polled the membership, kind of found out what motivates them, what would help bring them into the station. And so you need to kind of think about that. If you had nobody intended to go to college, then why have a college tuition part of your grant program, right? Things like that. So, kind of look at that. I have a section on manage the grant. I'm just going to skip over that now because we actually have run out of time. We're up against the 1 hour mark. But again, to just kind of understand that it's important to have record keeping. It's kind of understanding to maintain the grant. It's important that you meet with the reporting requirements, and it's important that you maintain communications with your grant specialist, and that you do things the right way. You have a policy in place to manage procurement. You follow those procurement guidelines, and you should have a written procurement policy in place, and you should provide competition. And if you get to the end of the grant, it can be amended. We're coming up, we have got about 8 months left on our grant. And I just put in an amendment, but I worked that out with the grant specialist ahead of time, what we wanted to do, because we had those 9 project activities. We had some that we had kind of depleted funding on and could use some funding onto it. And we had some others that we weren't spending at the level that we initially projected 3.5 years ago. And so we wanted to basically, without increasing the overall cost of the grant, we wanted to move stuff from one funding activity to another. And that's currently being processed, and our grant specialist had told us that it will be approved. So it's just a matter of getting it approved online. They typically will not extend it. 4 years is the most that you can get out of it. So again, you need to think about that. I talked about the frequently asked questions. Those are in the NOFO, so I'm not going to go through those here because, again, we have run out of time. So with that, I think we have a few more minutes, Tom. I know Matt, I know we've run over, but I'm willing to stay online. Let me just say this. Let me see. Let me just say this: that if you send John, exactly what I was going to say. Matt's going to tell you here in a minute. This session has been recorded and will be available up through our YouTube channel here within the next 2 or 3 days. A hard copy of my presentation materials can be made available. And probably the easiest thing to do. Let me see what I can do here. There's my email address at the bottom. If you want to email me, I would be happy to email you a hard copy of this presentation. Okay, plus it is being recorded. So additionally, I think Matt's probably going to talk a little bit about maybe if you're available. NVFC started something within the last year called Common Voices, and through our basically it's an online blog. If there are other questions, you can pose those on there, and Matt and I will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to answer your questions that you have. Robert had a question. Gym memberships be applied for all members of combination department, existing career and volunteer department. Again, this is for volunteer recruitment and retention. So the gym memberships that you're applying for should be for your volunteer members. No requirement that it can't be a combination department, but your benefit needs to be for your volunteer members. Matt, I don't see any more questions, so I'll let you I did kind of run over 5 minutes here, so.
Hey, no problem, Dave. There is one more that came in through the chat box that I don't think you addressed, so I wanted to make sure this one got answered if you could.
Okay.
It says our department is not fully NFPA 1582 compliant. We currently have not been doing the x-ray or the cancer screening. Would we be eligible for this for only new recruits, or will we need to implement this for our current members first?
Okay, well, the ability of funding for physicals for new members is a 1582 physical. So you certainly could ask for funding for a full 1582 physical, including the cancer screening for new members. You can unfortunately backfill that for existing members. Again, we're outside the AFG and probably won't be looking at AFG until the fall period for the new AFG. But if you look under the health and wellness program under AFG, there is funding there for initial physicals as well as periodic physicals for members, as well as mental health and cancer prevention stuff in the health and wellness part of AFG. So it's certainly not intended to be part of SAFER other than the physicals that you provide to new members. And so James asked for SAFER, pay for EMT training and certification. Again, you have to look at, the members' primary responsibilities have to be as a firefighter. If EMT is, for many of us, I know for me, 80 to 85% or better of our calls are EMS related, even though I'm going out on a big red fire truck. So having that EMT or EMR training, should be important. But are they a firefighter first?
All right, Dave, it looks like that covers all the questions we have. So once again, I'd like to thank you for another great presentation and thank everyone who attended. A copy of today's webinar will be available on the NVFC YouTube channel later this week. And if you're an NVFC member, the recording will be posted to our online forum.